All right. Happy Wednesday. It is our second podcast session for the Case Western Reserve University Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, where we learn how to grit it done. Today, we have the very unique opportunity to be talking with someone who literally just acquired a business, and as we speak, is neck deep in the trenches, taking that small business owner lifestyle on. So I'm here with Todd, and Ian, thank you so much for joining us here today. Can you just briefly give a quick minute or two background on yourself, the journey, the company you acquired, and then we'll delve into some fun stuff from there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you having me out. It's you make it sound so much more glorious too then.
There's nothing more glorious than being a small business owner, which I can happily talk about later. So
it is fun. It's great to be in the position I am. Very, very lucky to be in the position I'm in. So yeah, a little background about myself. So uh, I've had a background in corporate strategy through really multiple different industries, from logistics to healthcare to construction and backyard design. So it's always been my focus is how do I make the business grow? How do we make it better? What do we improve on? That's really been my niche everywhere I've gone. Um, Long story short, currently in a company called Dott Products. That's the business we recently acquired, myself and my partners. And we are a foam converter. So we take raw materials from the factory and manufacturing plants, and then we retrofit, we'll cut, we'll, apply adhesives. We'll basically retrofit any material to, so that way the end user can, use the product to spec.
great. And let me ask you a question. So you had a background doing strategy, right? You were obviously an employee. Now you are essentially running a company. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk about how that experience has been different from being an employee to being someone who's actually the boss of the company?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really rang home for me was, there was one day I finally had the realization, the paperwork had all gone through, and you're sitting there going, all right, now I'm no longer just responsible for my family. I'm now responsible for, X amount of people's families and their well-being and their opportunities and their potential growth. That was probably the biggest click in my head of as far as differences go. But
And Ian, when did that click happen? Was that got there on day one and you're like, whoa, I'm responsible for all these people? Or how did that mentality play out?
I would say it was one of those things that you always knew that was the case, but it was once the ink was dry on the paper and you sat back and you go like, oh, well, now it happened. Now it's real. So now we just got to make sure it happens and things get better and we only improve the business.
Hmm. And how long ago did the acquisition happen?
So we took ownership on the 2nd of January. So just about a month ago.
So in those first 30 days, what have been a couple of the things that have surprised you?
Pleasantly, I've been very surprised at really just the staff's and the whole team's ability to just quickly adapt. Um, a lot of it's going to be trust building and making sure, everything we say that we intend to do, we actually fulfill. But honestly, the people here have been great. It's been much less arduous as I thought it was going to be to build some of that trust up and start developing those relationships. That was a very good surprise.
And what have you done to help build that trust in those relationships?
What's always worked well for me, at least, is just going out and doing the work. So trying to actually understand, how everything in the shop actually gets made, running machines. I spent a couple hours last week coming in early to prep a machine. So when a guy got in, he already had one skid done of work. But it also helps me understand, all right, like,
Huh.
how does the sausage get made on top of it
Yeah.
all? And you just get time to get to know people. We were packaging up material the other day, and I learned about one of our team's family and her kids and her husband and what they've done and why she likes being here. And that was, I mean, the more time you can get doing that, the better, because you want to get to know everybody.
Did he know that you were going to come in and do that prepping of his machine? Or was that just a surprise? Hey, welcome to work, and your work's already been started. How did that?
It was a funny story. He did not know, but it was because they had just finished the original order and it shipped out. And then the truck broke down and the truck ended up unavailable to make it to its destination. So we actually had to rerun the whole order while insurance dealt with the trucking company. It wasn't our shipment, but
Hmm.
so it was more of a, hey, I don't want him to come in and dole him out the bad news of, hey, we have to remake everything. And, without putting at least some effort and plus side. So I spent some time making sure that was all ready for him, at least, and cut down on some of his workload.
Makes sense. So you talked about what a positive surprise was. Has there been any negative surprises or things that you just genuinely did not expect to be the case?
Uh, I wouldn't say the negatives. I would only say just lack of available information. So trying to pull together information that's just been either disorganized in the past or not digital. Um, I kind of expected it. Um, and that's really the only thing that has been a true pain at the moment. Um, that and dealing with some various payroll software, which seemed like it was going to give a very easy transition, but we've all banged our heads together for hours trying to make sure everyone's payment comes out as it should.
Yeah, that's great, because if there's one way to stumble in a transition, it's making sure the team members don't get paid. So I think those are probably very well spent hours to ensure that they ultimately are.
Yeah, got to make sure everyone's taken care of first and foremost.
Great. Can you walk through how you and your partners ultimately found this company, and just how the process played out?
Yeah, so well, we all found each other too through Promise, which I'm sure many people listening to this are probably at least familiar with.
And because they hear it from me all the time about how great Promise Partners is, but perhaps they could hear it from you this time as well. The best $400 I think anyone could ever spend, quite frankly.
I mean, the stats are phenomenal. I think like 25% of the members become an owner just through without the resources of the knowledge that become available through the other members, the mentors, the flights. I would have had no, I mean, just aimless trying to figure out everything. But the ability for them to go, hey, here's where you are. Here's the 10 steps you need to focus on over the next, however many days, months, years to get to where you need to be. I mean, yeah, to like you said, best $400 I ever spent. So I think I got a right hand roll through Promise. Stuck, I was there for a little over 2.5 years, and then ultimately found this opportunity because other Promise members had heard how things had gone in the right hand role, and this opportunity came. And ultimately, the group that I partnered with ended up just a great fit. And I don't know if I went into as much detail there. This is what the
No, it's
question was.
awesome. It's awesome.
I,
So let me ask you this, is that, one thing which a lot of people think through is, am I a business owner, right? Do I have to be in control of the business in order to find my fulfillment and my utility? Or, is having a role where I'm the boss, I'm the CEO, and I have good, solid equity in the business. So if the business does well, then I'm going to make a lot of money and be super successful. You've landed on what I'll call the equity employee side of things versus the outright owner.
yeah.
How did you think about that? And how do you think about it as, the next steps in your career as well? Do you have that identity as being a CEO? Do you ultimately want to be an owner? How did you think about this, given all the other opportunity sets that existed out there for you? Because it's something that a lot of people wrestle with. And I think that people that don't wrestle with it, quite frankly, should wrestle with it more. And how did you think through that?
It's a hard decision to make because like a lot of people are leaving or potentially leaving very well-paying, stable jobs with low risk to look at entrepreneur through acquisition. It's a hard thing to toss up for some people. Ultimately, what just kind of kept chipping away at me is in my roles, I kept driving the strategic side of things, but it annoyed me that at the end of it, I wasn't the owner driving those decisions. Uh, it just felt like a piece of the puzzle was missing for me. So that was after, a couple of years with that just constantly in the back of my head, that was what kind of reassured me to, all right, so I do actually want to make this transition. But I would say, I mean, it's not necessarily the right thing for everybody. If you're low risk tolerant, if you have a low risk tolerance, if it's, if you're very comfortable where you are, I mean, you can you can look at yourself pretty clearly and go, okay, should I make this transition or not? But no, it's certainly not right for everybody. And some people may be perfectly content in their role and do very well in life.
Mm-hmm. So talk about the relationship with the individual that sold the business, both with you and your partners. How has that played out over this first month plus?
I feel like that's always the wild card, because
Right.
you never really know. I mean, you hear people who say, they should never stick around for the long term, or, some people heavily advise it. I would say that was our relationship with the previous owner was one of the reasons that kept attracting us back to this deal. Very down to earth, very fair. From our experience, a very honest and high integrity individual. Most of his staff here has been here for, he had like a management team that had been here all 10 plus years. One lady's been here 25 years. So, I mean, a lot of the actions and work he had put in place really spoke louder than what he would tell us. But he's actually still got an office across the street. He's technically retired. But I mean, his reason for selling was, he wanted to get away from the day to day. He wanted to, it just became something he didn't love anymore. But he's still here one day a week. We actually, he comes in actually a little bit more than that, but he's only working one day a week, I should say. And he's still happy to advise on things. We actually contracted him for a certain number of hours over, basically the span of 6 months. But the way the relationship has developed and keeps going, it's very amicable. He seems to be much happier being able to. Now we just pose him, engineering questions and things that are more like, well, how do you think we make this, instead of, the dealing with the payroll software and all the stuff that he really didn't like to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, as long as, or the way things have been going, we hope to keep him around, and hopefully that relationship can stay as it is, because he's been in the business. This is actually going to be the company's 35th anniversary this year. So he's just a wealth of knowledge.
That's great. How did you and your partners source this deal? How'd you find it?
Yeah, so I came into the mix after the deal was already found. So I played very little part in sourcing it, but it actually was found through Biz Buy Sell. And one of the other members was just scrolling through one day looking for businesses, and he saw this, thought, well, I want this, but if I don't even take this, somebody at Promise should do this deal. And I came in shortly after they found the deal. And funny fact was, we toured the facility, and I started walking through here, and I was looking at some of the labels in the boxes, and I recognized one of the skids they had, positioned to ship. Mm-hmm. Turns out their largest customer was a company I used to work for. So I still had great relationships with all the people there. It's actually been a lot of fun reconnecting on the other side of the other side of the aisle.
That's fantastic. And what month, just for the sense of timing, did the Promise member, were they, fortuitously scrolling Biz Buy Sell and they came across this opportunity?
Yeah, so that would have been late fall. So from the time he found the order on Biz Buy, or the business on Biz Buy Sell, we had a signed LOI within about 30 days, somewhere around there. So I want to say it was September or October, but I might be a little iffy on the month there.
Yeah, so basically 3-4 months, see a business that makes sense, get an LOI signed, and then an acquisition happens. I mean, it literally can happen that fast, because people talk about with, search funds or self-funded searches, they can take 12 months, 24 months, 10 years, right? People spend a lot of time doing this, but they actually do happen quicker. Okay, so they
I
find the
think we were
business, they get you involved, the LOI. Can you walk through to some of the closing processes, the diligence processes, things you had to deal with your partners, the whole 9 yards? Can you give us some insights into that?
yeah. I mean, I'll try to not rabbit tail too much off this, but
The
I would say
rabbit tails are always the best.
the one thing that a Promise member had told me very frequently, because I kept thinking, well, I'll do a part-time search, or instead of a self-funded full-time search. And he kept telling me that's a bad idea. It's not going to work. You won't have the time to dedicate to it. And I kept thinking to myself, it's not available for me at the moment, so I need to at least try part-time for a while. After getting into it, though, I mean, his words couldn't have rang more true. If it weren't for three of us, because I still did technically a part-time acquisition, I just did it with three other people.
Mhm.
If it weren't for those other folks, with us all kind of carrying our individual pieces, I mean, I never would have been able to dedicate enough of my own time while working a full-time job to actually get this deal across the line. It's a very time consuming, um, labor intensive process, which all too well. But I mean, our relationship worked very well. We put together a quick game plan, how much, here's everything we need to account for in due diligence, who was going to track that, who was going to, make sure we got all the documents cover the bases that we need. Um, and then who's going to take each of those individual pieces and, run with them. And then we had weekly meetings where we just tracked every bit of progress, put to-dos up for the week following, knocked them out, and just kind of rinse and repeat until we got through the whole process. Ultimately, from start, from finding it on Biz Buy Sell to the day we closed the deal, will end up being about 70 some days, somewhere in the mix there. So I mean, very, very effective process in order to get through due diligence. We ultimately got the other thing that I will say was very, probably the most accurate information or advice someone's given is make sure you have a lawyer who knows the deal process well. We had one. The seller did not. It was
Well, you can tell the name of your attorney if you want to plug him, but probably not the name of the seller's attorney if you don't want to plug them, right?
great guy. Don't get me wrong. Actually, we actually signed all the paperwork in a bar down the street, and that was more, the previous owner was a very casual guy, and so this was very fitting. It was where we had one of our first meetings with him, and then so we used Thrasher, Dinsmore, and so they were great. No complaints about them. But the other guy, great guy. You could tell that's not what he spent his career focusing on. So they were friends, the previous owner and his attorney. So that's why he brought him in. But it slowed down the process. Ultimately, it caused some frustration on both ends because everyone wanted to get this thing done after a certain point. And at the end of the day, though, it got there. But that was a very applicable information of, make sure it's a lawyer who does deals. It will make your life a lot easier.
Now, the relationship that you have with that attorney and your partners had, was it the first time you'd worked with that attorney? Was that cultivated before the search process began? Or was that one thing where it's like, hey, we got to find an attorney. Let's just, email, pick up the phone and find something that makes sense. How did you guys have that lined up?
So that was an existing relationship that one of the other partners had. I can't recall if that was the lawyer they used on their previous deal, but the specific partner of mine did have an existing relationship with that attorney.
And we talked about how attorneys can be an important part in the process. Were there any other challenges or issues that came up, during the searching and the closing process that might have had things fall apart that you were able to successfully navigate around that would be a useful experience share? It's always the fun stuff, right?
Yeah, actually, I forgot about this until you mentioned it. At one point, we were setting up the HR software and getting just some of the names and some of the very, very basic things in place for like a 401k transition and some other objects. And the software company mailed out the new company name to various staff members at the existing business, which uh, caused a lot of quick panic. Thankfully, it only was sent to two. One of them just brushed it off and didn't think anything of it. The other one was the owner's wife. So thankfully she was clued in, but we all had a small panic there because the previous owner reached out to us immediately, and he was not too thrilled of the premature announcement that to no fault of our own that got released. But
And how long was that before close?
oh gosh, that was pretty close to the end.
Yeah.
We were over 50% of the way there, but we all felt like we were headed in the right direction, but it certainly wasn't set in stone yet. Um, yeah, really, there wasn't a lot of high stress moments where we thought the deal was gonna fall through. There were a couple times in the very beginning where you were uncertain on how serious the business, is the guy going to get cold feet at some point? He started this, he's ran it for 35 years. I mean, is this something he could really just walk away from?
Yeah.
Um, Once we really got into it, and the more we got to talk to the owner, which I feel like we might be the rare exception on this, there wasn't too many instances where felt like, oh, okay, well, this is bad. We either got to jump in front of this or, the deal could fall through. Couple contention points around inventory analysis and how do we calculate. We took some special calculations towards if the inventory isn't in a workable WIP or bill of materials currently, we're not going to count that as valued inventory, which that caused some stress points.
Mm.
But overall, I would say it went pretty well. Yeah, the only other minor one was, they got annoyed by the length of some of our documents, but it was.
So now that you're in there though, so deal closes, been there for about a month. You did your detailed diligence, whole 9 yards. Is there anything that you didn't discover doing diligence that you've since now discovered being in the trenches for a little over a month?
Oh, certainly. There is basically no minimum order quantities ever enforced. So I mean, we've got hundreds of invoices that are for $20 here, $30 there. There's plenty of things to work on, I should say.
Yeah.
There was machine maintenance that was maybe not foreclosed as not foreclosed, that's not the right word, but they might not have told us exactly how much maintenance or in what condition some of the machines really were in. I mean, overall, though, you can tell from the best intentions that the owner was trying to be very forthcoming.
Yeah.
He's a very high integrity individual. He was a pack rat. I mean, I probably spent 3 days throwing out samples from like the early 90s, but a very high integrity individual. And
so when did the team find out about the sale, and how did you manage the messaging with them?
So we waited. We let the previous owner drive that messaging because he has such close ties and relationships with all these people, especially since they've all been here years and years and years. The way we decided to go about it was the owner was just going to kind of announce, hey, we're going to have a breakfast at the start of the year, kick everything off. Didn't really make any mention of the transition yet. And I should preface this with the owner had also alluded to people over the past years that, hey, I'm probably going to be getting out of this pretty quickly.
Yeah, so there wasn't too much of a surprise there.
Yeah. And I think he may have let some of the info slide prior to, at least there's 3 people on the management team. I'm pretty sure they knew before this breakfast. But it panned out. It turned out very well. So all's well that ends well. But
Yeah, so there wasn't much surprise there. They kind of knew this might be coming. Now, have there been any people shakeups or any people issues, at least ones you want to talk about, that have happened since the transition? I know you mentioned it earlier that it seemed to be pretty smooth.
it did, yeah. And so we did have one person leave, but it was only they had only been here about 8 months, and it wasn't because of the transition. Yeah, he wanted to work a night shift, and for safety reasons, we don't run night shifts because we can't have someone in the shop alone running heavy machinery with
Hmm.
just too much that could go wrong there. So he ultimately went to it's actually it's not even the same industry, or even light manufacturing. It's entirely unrelated, and he actually wants to come back in about 2 months. And um, so I'm very happy to say that aside from that, there was no turnover with the company, and the one guy who did leave is it wasn't because of the transition, it wasn't because of fear of the future. There wasn't any bad relationship. He actually came in like a couple of days after he had technically quit and had a conversation with us about coming back in March. So
That's great. Now, we talked about how you had a right-hand man role before this opportunity came about. How did you manage transitioning out of what you were previously doing to this opportunity, given the uncertainty of that you don't actually know if this is going to close, right? You want to maintain a good relationship with the current opportunity you have going. Can you walk through how that part of your life looked and how you navigated through that?
yeah, and I would say the kind of the not understated piece, but the part that I think people don't look at a lot on is how it impacts your family.
Mm.
So it was a lot of
You jumped ahead to my next question, so I love
well,
that. Proactive,
I'll just
baby.
leave that one
Proactive
be.
being, yeah.
I'll leave that one be. We'll pick that one up in episode 3. Uh, but that was a big piece of it. Was a lot of late night conversations with my wife. What's the stability of this other company? How sure are we that it can grow? What's the plan look like? What do finances look like over the next couple of years? Making sure that we can at least facilitate the life we've been living. And we got 2 little kids, so it's always making sure the bases are covered. But um, as far as transitioning away from the right hand role, I may be a little bit of an oddball here, but at the talking with the owner of the last company I was with, he's actually in EO. He's very familiar with. He's actually heard of Promise and will actually be coming to the next quarterly with me.
Great.
Him and I had a very good and open relationship. Ultimately, he was a really young guy and just wasn't looking for a partner, and that's why him and I didn't work out in the long term. But so it was about a year. So as of like this past December, the year prior, him and I sat down, kind of reevaluated what the longevity of my working relationship would look like with him, because he knew ultimately where I wanted to go, that I wanted to own a business. I actually came into that role with him very open about that. And so after about 2 years, we came in, we started talking about this. And at the end of that meeting, it kind of landed on, well, I'll definitely be here through 2023. I'll give you that whole year. But, after that, I'm probably going to be starting to either launch a search or, take a lot more time away from where I'm at. And so we had kind of agreed this is probably going to be my last year with the company. And then it just so happens that I also came across this partnership with everybody else around that September, October timeframe. So the timelines actually worked out great. And then once I had a signed LOI, I told the owner of the previous business that, hey, this is where everything stands. So that way I gave him I think he had about 2 months heads up at that point, where once we started entertaining the deal, I had already started kind of trying to train other people on roles anyways, because the right hand role I did was actually starting a new division for the company. So that was my baby, and I was very emotionally tied to it.
Yeah.
That was actually kind of a surprise to me, is how it actually kind of hurt to pull away from that, because there was, I think, still a lot of growth opportunity for that division. And it's not fun watching somebody else raise your kid.
Right. Right. Okay, so let me ask you this. And it speaks to the power of relationships, right? A good relationship with the owner of that business, and you've had a great relationship, it sounds like, with the seller of the business you bought and with the team members that are there and your partners. So I'm
Mhm.
hearing a lot about relationships here. What would you have done though? How would life look for you right now if you hadn't had this opportunity come about? What was your plan? Were you gonna go out there and do a self-funded search? What were you thinking?
Yeah, so at that point in time, I was actively looking at potential investors, so I could launch a self-funded search. That was the alternative plan, was um, begrudgingly accept the fact that a full-time search was going to be the necessary plan of action.
And
And
that's the exact advice I give people all the time, by the way, is that if you're not all in, you're in the way. But I digress.
there's a
Go.
couple of people that say that same thing, so I'm sure you
Yeah.
can
I think
piece
they all
together.
got it from me at Promise Partners, by the way. I think I planted that seed. Now it's off. It's a great saying though.
It is, and it's accurate.
Yeah. So you'd have gone off and done a self-funded search, but this opportunity came about. Great. Well, tell me about what the next steps for the business are. What's the next, 60 days going to look like for you as you work up to 100 days? What are the priorities? What's the next steps for Ian?
Yeah. So we built basically a 90-day plan on the absolute necessities that need accomplished. Now that's an ever-changing list. We found the first 30 days were pretty accurate, but
Yeah.
you get into 60 and we start realizing we uncover a lot of new things that are coming up and need tweaked or changed or taken care of. Now, originally our plan was to not change much in the very beginning, but everyone's been very receptive. And so we're kind of picking and choosing different things to implement. A more structured weekly meeting for production and sales, um, things that a lot of the staff were actually asking for. So we came in, we did one-on-ones for everybody, and that's where we kind of picked out a lot of what we actually decide to attack over the next 100 days. So it's a lot of it is putting in some additional structure that's requested, and then a lot of the rest is getting out there, meeting our customers in person, meeting our vendors in person. Start implementing. Another pain point was the MOQs, the fact that they just are non-existent. And I've heard so many people on the shop side say, "Please don't make me
And
go
for
pick."
those people that don't know what MOQs are, can you elaborate?
Oh, yeah, sorry, minimum order quantities. So
The
we sell things
$20.
typically by the case, and we have a handful of customers who will order, one bath mat or one of these or one of those or four of these, and everyone in the shop side is just like, please, if you do anything, just get them on standard quantities so we don't having to pick random boxes, try to make everything fit. So that's one
Yeah, it
more,
sounds like there's some good low-hanging fruit to take out there. That's great.
and that's what it was. It was just identify the low hanging fruit and start cracking at it.
That's awesome. Anything else that you want to mention to either people that are thinking about going down this path, those people that are neck deep in the search, or other operators, just things that we haven't had a chance to talk about that you think are worthwhile to throw out there?
I would say, I mean, if you're on the cusp and you don't know if this is the right fit or the wrong fit, depending on what you're currently doing in your role, you're never going to be negatively impacted by asking for more work, trying to shape your role, get more well-rounded, get yourself. Even if you don't end up into buying a business someday, you're only going to end up more well-rounded, more backable. You're going to become more appetizing for your current employer, other employers. I mean, you're only going to ever see your opportunities grow. And I think a lot of what led me to here today was, one, networking, knowing the right people. Definitely join Promise if you're thinking about it, because I wouldn't be sitting in this chair today without 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 everybody in Promise. I mean, good night. It's just it's a wealth of resources that you'd be missing out if you weren't taking some action with that group. That's a phenomenal source.
That's fantastic. Well, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to chat for today. I know you have 28 million things going on as you continue to learn the business and get those operational improvements and knock out those QOMs that are causing some headaches. But thank you
Mhm.
so much for the time. So get back out there and grit it done. And let's stop our recording here.